I think calling on people would be good.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this special panel discussion with a group of remarkable filmmakers whose films are featured in the Saying Goodbye film set as part of Viet Film Fest 2021. My name is Julie Vo. I'm a board member with the Vietnamese American Arts and Letters Association, also known as VALA, who is also the host of Viet Film Fest. I want to thank all of you for joining us for this year's virtual film fest and supporting beautiful, multi-dimensional Vietnamese voices and stories from around the world. So before we dive into this exciting conversation with our filmmakers today, I'd love to do a round of introductions. And so filmmakers, can you please introduce yourself, where you are joining us from, and share a brief synopsis of your film? So let's start with Scott.
Scott, you're muted.
Can you guys hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me start over then. My name is Scott, or Hung Young, and I'm currently in Huntington Beach, California. And well, first, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Vit Film Fest and all the staff for making this event possible and for screening my short film. So thanks so much for that. So my short film is about an estranged grandson who returns home to heal his grandmother with PTSD and dementia using a virtual reality simulation in an expected share experience. So I guess that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. What about Julian, director of Raspberry?
Hi, everyone. I'm Julian Doan. I know I'm mispronouncing it, but that's my diasporic pronunciation. I wrote and directed and edited the film Raspberry. It is a film about a family watching their father pass away and needing to say their final goodbyes as the funeral home comes to take his body away. And it's based on a real experience. My family and I were watching my father pass away 3 years ago, and it's sort of it's an attempt to look at the realistic and mundane kind of air around watching someone die.
Thanks so much, Julian. Quyên.
Hi everyone, chào mọi người. My name is Quyên Nguyễn Lê. I'm based in Garden Grove, Little Saigon, California, originally from Los Angeles. And my film is called The Morning Passing on El Cajon Boulevard. It's a short documentary about a second-generation funeral worker who is challenged for the first time to do her own father's funeral. So I'm really excited to be a part of this panel. I can already see themes in our films emerging.
Thank you, Quyên. And Sean.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us wherever you are. For those of you watching, my name is Sean David Christensen. I was the director of Ghost Tape Number 10, which is a documentary about a psychological operations campaign that was waged by the U.S. Army during the American War in Vietnam that weaponized tenets of Buddhist ancestor worship to create a sort of abstraction and a weaponization of culture for psychological operations against the Northern Vietnamese.
All right. So, the title of our set is Saying Goodbye. And I think anyone who hears that, they have sort of, an understanding and so just reading the titles of your films, it's like, oh, what is this? But I think in watching your films, like they all have such powerful sort of renderings of what this sort of common theme is. So a powerful through line in your films is the experience of loss and memory. So particularly for those that remain and the rituals that are created and sustained. So we'd love to hear from you. What particular understanding of loss and memory did you want to convey through your film? So anyone who'd like to share first, please feel free.
I think I can share first. So, for my documentary, people always ask me, like, how'd you get this idea? And so much of it was because I met the film subject, Julian, was really intrigued by what she did as her job, as someone who manages funerals, mostly for Southeast Asians, but just for the San Diego community in general. And I was interested in how someone who is so used to being around loss and people losing their loved ones deals with a loss herself. Um, and so much of that comes from my own personal interest of just being afraid of what to do if a loved one passed. And I didn't have the kind of generational memory to know what to do, and to do the proper things for my loved ones who might pass away in the future. Um, and so I think so much of loss kind of triggers a need to hold that memory. And I think for my film in particular, we're just trying to figure out how to kind of hold those two things. And in a very literal way, I think is, um, in refugee communities, we always talk about loss and holding on to memory. But I think funeral practices make it kind of material and kind of literal.
Thank you, Gwen. Other folks?
I guess I can follow up. I was struck by this idea of the cruelty of how these tapes were engineered, these ghost tapes. Ghost tape number 10 in my film is just one of many recordings that the U.S. Army engineered, and essentially what it was is they hired actors, South Vietnamese actors, to portray family members who were deceased and who were quite literally crying out from beyond the mortal world to loved ones left behind. And I was struck by the cruelty and the abstraction of somebody finding something that's so sacred to all of us, which are bonds of kinship, bonds of family that tie us to this world and to our ancestors, and twisting that in such a way where the idea of love or remembrance could be weaponized. And what's even more chilling about the way the tapes behave now is when I discovered the archival recording through the Smithsonian, it's almost found a second life, a second haunting on the internet, so to speak. So I find these voices of these abstracted voices that were engineered are now haunting the sort of digital scape that we're in right now. So the idea of loss, yeah, I was even listening to the recording now, having since made the film, it's still a kind of a withering experience, to listen to how these things could be created.
Thank you, Sean. I mean, I think, on first, the first impression is your film, Sean, and Gwing's film are so different, but I remember like the feeling watching it for me, just the rituals and like the sounds, like the audio is like so powerful, right? Like, or even watching the images, Gwing, in your film of things that I've seen, in my own experience. It's very close, right? It hits really personal. So, Scott or Julian?
Yeah, I can speak about it. I think, like the kind of like main thing I guess I wanted to try to portray and explore was it's interesting that you ask about memory, because I haven't really talked much about that, but in trying to, I remember like after my father passed away, like we had to like write eulogies for his funeral, and it's like I was struggling to remember. My dad was sick with cancer for 2 years, and it's like I was struggling to even remember like who he was before being sick, you know, like my memory of him as a person like started to become only those 2 years. And it's like I couldn't even think of anything to write about him when he was healthy. um it was just weird. It was like this total cloud like that was just like, you know, blocking my mind. And so I think I wanted to try to capture like that sense of not knowing like what to you know what to say. I felt like words, like there's no amount of language that like can adequately describe like everything I want to say about, you know, someone who meant so much to me and like losing them. And it just felt like this like Herculean impossible task. So I think that's kind of the main thing I wanted to try to get at, but kind of like mixed in with all of that, um the sort of like nature of losing someone was like really shocking to me because it was just so, you know, you see, I watch, you know, as all of us do, like learn a lot from movies. And I think like movies taught a certain, to expect a certain thing from dying and from death. You know, it's always kind of like dramatic and reverent in some way. And to caretake for someone at home means like it's mixed very directly with, you know, the everyday and the mundane and the pedestrian things that you do for like, you know, in my case, my father, you know, was in hospice at home for 2 weeks, just slowly passing away. And so I was just like, and then when I watched him die, it was just so anticlimactic. So I kind of wanted to just capture like how kind of weird and awkward it all is. And then, you know, to watch strangers come in and like take my dad away was just like, it's just bizarre, you know. It's I don't quite know. There's no like good way to describe it. I think like something like that needed to kind of be experiential. So yeah, so I think film was sort of the medium in which I was like, this is how we can, you know, explore this and kind of portray what it really feels like to like go through losing someone in a way that's like not taught by movies and TV and media all that often.
Yeah, and you certainly did that. I mean, I think, yes, I think you're so on point in sharing that. I think it must feel like an out of body experience, right? It's like you're there but not there, and kind of watching the moving people and the images in front of you. And I just really appreciate the way in which you captured that. So,
Thank you.
and Scott?
Mm, I wasn't sure that my film was really about loss. But then once I realized that it was kind of that viewers were seeing it as loss, because my intention was the film was really about connection. Then when I started thinking about loss, I realized that I made this film in a way. It was a tribute to my grandmother who passed when I was living in Vietnam for about 6 years. And the last time I saw her was um, through FaceTime on my iPhone when she was in the US and I was in Vietnam. So there was that sense of like connection through, I guess, virtual reality or through FaceTime. And that I was in Vietnam, but the reason why I was in Vietnam was because I wanted to learn about her history and her birthplace and where she grew up, which was in Nam Dinh. So I spent a lot of time in Nam Dinh where I lived there and I walked around. So I was retracing her footstep and just trying to reimagine her life. So in a way, for me in that moment and trying to recreate this film was connecting to her through a virtual space, but at the same time through a spiritual space by connecting to her past and being in the present at the same time and connecting to history so then I could learn about my history at the same time. So it's two things happening at the same time, you know? So that's the reason why I think I made the film, and then really understanding why it has that experience of loss and the need to connect.
Yeah, that's beautifully shared. Thank you so much, Scott. So, No, you're right. Thinking about loss, but I think so much of that is also about memory, right? And so you share that in terms of connection and being able to retell or connection to your grandmother's story. So my next question was going to be a little bit around like what compelled or inspired you, but I think you all have sort of shared a little bit about that. So I just wanted to transition into the question around sort of the generational connection within your characters and within your storyline. So like I mentioned, your films are just really beautiful, beautifully powerful portrayals of this theme of either loss, nostalgia, memory, the experience of saying goodbye. And the intergenerational relationships that you portray, either within family or within community, are very striking and pivotal in your storytelling. Can you share a little bit about what informed your characters and their relationship to one another? I know some of you have shared a little bit of your personal experience, but if you can elaborate on that as well. How about we start with Julian?
Sure. It's interesting. So, when I wrote this film, there were a lot more characters in the room. There was, I think I originally wrote it to kind of have like this large, sort of Asian American family, like there was aunts and uncles, and it was kind of like a full gathering of like a large room with maybe like potentially 3 generations. But honestly, we had to shoot the film, and from prepping it to shooting it was only like 2.5, 3 weeks. So I just was like freaking out about trying to gather that many actors and paying actors to just kind of, they had to be good at acting and like be able to emote and cry and do all these things and be present, but also, not have any lines. So anyway, I scaled down the family, and I kind of used the shape of my family, 2 parents and a sister and 2 brothers. And they're it's a very short film. They're kind of archetypal. They each essentially get to say like one thing to their father before he's taken away. And so I think we were trying to kind of like tell as much in their character and through the way that they dress and the kind of like the way that they move and the way that they interact with each other physically, and trying to give a little bit of a hint through what they say to the dad. And so our costume designer Lydia Grabowski Bauer like worked a lot on trying to give each of them a different kind of, for the older brother, we kind of like dressed him so he's a little bit more regal, and he's like kind of like given the sense that he's like the man of the family, that he kind of leads everyone. And with the sister, we gave her like a bit more of like spiritual edge, and that she's kind of like the one who like holds the family together. And we kind of did those through like her necklace, and there's all these like little details that I thought were very exciting to kind of like put together. But I think ultimately it was about, for the main character, is about setting up an expectation of his goodbye. So we were just kind of trying to craft that like his brother and his sister who say goodbye before him have like something really strong and something really specific that they say to the father, so that like we create like an expectation for him and for an audience of like needing to live up to their goodbyes. Because again, in writing the eulogies, I don't really want to speak for my siblings, but there's like this, the elephant, this little elephant in the room of like competition of like who who can write like the most personal goodbye, or who can write, maybe that's just me and I'm just a competitive person like that, but I think everyone probably thinks like that goes to everyone's mind a little bit, and maybe we don't talk about it. So that's kind of it. But for me as like a director, I think what really excited me was just trying to like the blocking, like trying to kind of like move them in ways like it was like a lot of like, oh, the mom having her son come over and telling him to go first, and that was kind of like a lot of what we did on the day, just a lot of kind of physical action.
Thank you, Julian. Other folks who'd like to share?
Sure, I could go. So talking about intergenerational family, I think this short film that I sort of was that I made really dealt with trauma and how that kind of left the family estranged. And it's kind of based on my family experience and how my grandmother's kind of traumatized because of the, like the Indochina War and the Vietnam War. So like the older generations are pretty conflicted, and then like your parents' generations are also conflicted, and then somehow that's passed down to you. So the film was really about returning and healing your family, and by healing your family, you kind of heal yourself. So in a way, it deals with that sort of intergenerational like healing.
I can go next. So this is my first, I would say, professional documentary. Before that, I worked on scripted content mostly, where I get to, control what people's relationships are to each other. And I think with this film, it was like the difference for me in documentary is that it's such a test of endurance. And I was very fortunate that Julie, who's also Julie, not you, Julie, other Julie in the film, was just so open with having me just tag along. So we had a DP, but there were many times where it was just me and her, and I would just follow her around for like a week or two, just every single day. And I think so much of her relationships to other people, I was starting to notice maybe sometimes off camera, and then had to later in the edit room kind of figure out how do I represent what I know is true from having been there over time in like a short visual moment. And I think that was such an interesting challenge to have like on a creative level. But I'm also very lucky to have because she was so open with just me being there, and I think acted very much like like I wasn't there. She would refer to me and loop me in and things like that. But from the get-go, even though we didn't know what was going to happen in the documentary, it was always designed to speak about generations. She had a mentor who had been there for generations, and of course, it's about loved ones passing away. So there's already the subtext of kind of generational stories. And I think just as a person, I'm like obsessed with intergenerational stories. Like as someone who was born and raised here, um, I didn't have grandparents. My parents were both orphans. So there's kind of this loss of generational memory that I've always been obsessed with, and really kind of always wanted to have a connection with other folks in my community, in Vietnamese community, who were not my parents. Um, so I think I'm always looking out for those connections, whether it be like a mentor member or somebody's actual blood related family. And that was the idea from the beginning. But the rest of it, I think, is just paying really close attention to how people interact with those around them.
Thank you, Gwen.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on what Julian said. This feeling of we have this innate desire to find these connections or find these ties that remind us of either our mortality or our reverence for something larger than ourselves. I think it's the world is already a scary enough place to feel like you're in it all by yourself, and family is one of those things that just gets kind of woven inside of you and keeps you together. Um, and that was one thing that I was just struck by when I originally visited Vietnam in 2017. I went during September, during the 7th lunar month, where cities and peoples and villages are all kind of celebrating this corpus of festivals in and around the cosmology of the dead and honoring the dead and honoring ancestors. You have Ulan, where it's, you're honoring your mother and father, but primarily the mother. It's kind of seen as like a Mother's Day in there, and you also have the Hungry Ghost Festival, which was kind of interesting in this idea of offerings, like a different type of offering would be laid out for the hungry ghosts or the orphaned ghosts, that were different than the offerings you would lay out for your family members. You would cook the really nice things for your family members. You would make sure to buy their favorite pack of smokes. I visited the home of somebody who had bought their late husband their favorite pack of cigarettes, and had made sure to hang his guitar on the wall because she remarked, when he comes back, I want to make sure that he can get it. So this idea of you lift up your family members by literally placing them on an altar higher than everything else, and the offerings you leave on the ground for hungry ghosts or wandering ghosts, wandering spirits, you leave them on the floor because they don't have the energy to to take them up. They're just kind of like crawling. And what was just really kind of a rich experience of just observing this and being invited into these people's homes that I could document it, was this feeling of we live our lives parallel to the dead. And all you have to do is just look to your left or your right, and you can see the dead walking alongside you. And that was very different than the way that I was acculturated in America. How Julian was talking about how we're acculturated in America through TV and film, and it describes a narrative of like death is like a chapter, and you close the book and you move on. And it's further from the truth. Like Scott was talking about, this idea of intergenerational trauma, these things that linger and sustain. And I looked at these festivals as a way of the world of the living continuing to walk side by side with the dead, and look to the left and the right and find these connections. And it was just a really, really beautiful thing to be able to document.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean, for sharing that and making those connections. Definitely. And I think that's a really great transition to our next question, which some of you have mentioned in your responses. But, thinking about the movement of the Vietnamese people globally and the rituals, customs, and traditions that move with us, right? And also, like you said, Sean, the customs and norms around death and memory and loss that we enter into in a diasporic community. How does your film work or retain or transform these rituals and traditions for future generations? And, I'm particularly curious for our filmmakers who come from a Vietnamese background, like you're sort of thinking about your story and the story that you're making and it being a part of Viet Film Fest, right? And sort of what your vision is in terms of how your film sort of retains those rituals and traditions or transforms it. What about you, Scott? Let's start. Just take yourself off mute.
Can you hear me now? Okay, so growing up, living with my grandmother, I would see her like perform a lot of like animism rituals, which is part of the Northern Vietnamese tradition and custom, and you could still see it today if you travel to the north of Vietnam. And but when she migrated to the U.S., so some of the rituals that she would do, she would like change it because there's no means for her to kind of recreate what was in Vietnam. So in a way, she would make like drawings on paper plates and like hang them around the house as protectors and guardians, or trying to connect to lost family members. And so in a way, she kind of transform it into her own sort of her own rituals, and I find that really interesting. So it's in a way it's very, I guess it's Vietnamese American in a sense, and so that kind of influenced me on creating this film where the main character is a VR designer, and he uses VR as a way to trying to heal and connect with his grandmother and family through the past and present. And in a way, VR is almost, you could look at it as a ritual, like performances. And so in a way, it's all of those different mediums is about really connecting to the divine or lost one, to a place or to an experience or to each other. But it's just through different mediums and through different traditions and technology. That's it. I don't know if that make any sense.
No, that's good. Thank you so much, Scott. Definitely. What about you, Gwing?
Yeah, I think maybe 2 points is that I think that we always do the best we could do, just to quote Tibui's graphic novel, right? And I think there's these funny moments where I think that as a second generation person, I think that I always look up to my elders and think that they're always doing things, quote unquote, like the right way, like the proper way. But they're also doing the best they could do, and they're also kind of making their own kind of little changes to things. So, like an example of that is like my mother's ganjua. I always thought that was like the traditional ganjua, right? But then I learned, my mom was in a refugee camp in Thailand, and she actually loved tom yum way better. And so now her ganjua is like this random tom yum. And I grew up being like, okay, this is like the dish, And I think so much of this obsession with like tradition makes us forget that our parents, our grandparents, and everyone before them, every single generation, are people messing up tradition, or or going around in their own environment and kind of making do with what they have and what they feel like, and and what they know. And so much of that kind of pressure to hold and retain rituals and traditions, I think, is eased off of me, actually, when I think of my relationship with my elders in that way. And I think, with regards to this film, there is, of course, a desire to retain some semblance of a ritual for people who pass away in a place that they probably didn't intend to pass away in. Like a lot of the communities that were served by the people in my films are, or in this film, are refugees or immigrants. And maybe they thought at one point they would go to Vietnam or return to Vietnam. And so to honor these things that we know and to do our best, but then also know that there are things that are kind of diasporic about it, like certain kinds of things. And it's not so much about, just like in something that I thought was funny was there was like a wind up recording of a monk reading like just saying like Namo Ayuda like over and over, but it was like a recording, and they they just left it there. And I was just thinking about how like funny that is, because probably at one point a monk had to be there and literally do it, and then they would have to switch and things like that. But now we have a recording. Is the recording the same? I don't know, but that's what we're gonna use. Yeah, those are my 2 cents about rituals.
Thank you, Gwing. I love that. And I feel like you sharing that about like they've all just been doing the best that they can. Like I feel like that speaks so much sort of like grace, and just sort of reframes, our understanding of like there's so much pressure. Like for me, like as a second gen Viet, like, oh, I have to retain this, or like thinking about like the things that we pass on. But I think that's such a powerful truth that you share. Thank you. Julian, or
Yeah,
uh-huh.
yeah, I'll jump in because a lot of what you guys are talking about very much relates to, you know, what I think thought about going through all that. And it's funny that Gwen brings up the wind up toy, because I remember when my dad was passing away, when, you know, they brought like this little like radio like this big that was like battery operated, that also like emitted this like Buddhist, you know, the chanting, and they like left it in the room, and it's like, it sounds horrible, it's like coming through this tiny speaker, you know. Probably cost like 50 cents. It's so funny to like see the reverence mixed with like how it actually is. And I think a lot of um you know, I'm not like a spiritual person. I don't think I'm a very ritualistic person either. And I think a lot of like going through death, like just the way I look at things and experience things is just like looking at the way, you know, that we perform grief at some level. It feels somewhat like a performance if you're going to do it in front of other people. Um, it's almost like, you know, when a camera's on, like automatically people start performing, even if they try not to. You know, it's I felt like grief feels a little bit like that, and it's subconscious. But yeah, I don't. I think it's just like, I think about any ritual of trying to deal with death, such as, you know, here in America, like, you know, there's a certain like there's like body removal. It's just a thing that people need to do, and that's part of the ritual, right? And like it's it's trying to be reverent, like you said. It's, you know, we're all trying our best. These people are trying to come into the home of a stranger, and they have to try and be reverent and honorable and polite. But like, I mean, the reality of what they're doing is very, very different from that. And so there's these two things that are trying to like coexist at the same time. And I think I just find that very funny.
I'll follow up to that. Thanks, Julian. This idea of recordings, you know, like the monk reciting the prayer, the devotional on a piece of reel-to-reel tape. You know, I think that there's a similarity to what I do as a documentary filmmaker, as ethnographer. You know, trying to salvage these embodied practices of belief and of remembrance. And these recordings, in my case, this film was a way to preserve these rituals of remembrance and being the caretaker of your ancestors' souls, as a way to hold that up as an oppositional reflection against this horrible abstraction of belief that the U.S. Army created. And I wanted to create these opposing reflections of what death means, almost as a way to diminish the power of this tape that now just seems to spiral in these strange corners of the internet, where somebody discovers it and it sparks this whole line of questioning. When people ask me about the film, they always want to know about who made the tape, how did they make it, what sort of studio did they use, what sort of you know, what was the script like. And for me, it's not about the tape. It's the smallest part of what I was interested in. That it was just a crack in the door that allowed me to explore this world of how we take care not only of our life, but the lives that we then become responsible for when our folks die. You know, because you carry that memory with you. And for me, that was a much more resonant theme to explore as a filmmaker, instead of drilling down into the specificity of a tape. I mean, for me, just knowing that it was created and the facts I was able to parse away from history and just create that as a template for people to, you know, reflect on, you know, that this horrible recording exists, and how it kind of stands as sort of a powerless, now it's this powerless foe, you know, in the midst of people continuing to live their lives, continuing to grieve and to live. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Sean. I think I definitely appreciate the fact that really jarring and like kind of a traumatic, sort of experiencing that, hearing it and learning about it for the first time, but really just opened up the door to you telling the story and learning so much about, what actually exists and how people are sort of engaging with these rituals and, in history. So thank you. So as we sort of wind down our conversation today, I wanted to ask and give an opportunity for you all to share anything about your film that you haven't had a chance to. I know there's so many ways that we could have explored each of your experiences. But in addition to that, I also wanted to ask if you all are currently working on anything else, or you have, things that you would like to work on next, that you would like to share with us. Let's start with Guiying.
I'm still thinking about if there's anything about the film that hasn't been shared. I'll come back to it if I do. I'm taking a stab at my second documentary. I'm making a short film about my mother's nail salon that closed at the onset of the pandemic. It was her livelihood for my whole entire life, and unfortunately had to go away. So I think there's like some closure on the abstract level of what that place meant to us that I'm trying to parse through. I've attempted to make a film about my mother, I think at least once for the last 5 years. So I have all this random footage. She's very gracious and she always goes along with everything that I ask her to do. So I have a lot of random footage of my mother doing random things. So that's what I'm currently working on. And in terms of what I would like to work on, I'll just throw this in the universe. If anyone's working on a feature, I'm trying to get on a feature and learn from all of you. So I've been making shorts for my whole life, and I'd like to try more long form.
Well, I'll go next because I am working on a feature, Gwen, so we can keep in touch. I don't really have anything more to share about Raspberry, but I am working on a feature-length script that explores the same thing, this time with Vietnamese characters, and takes place in Huntington Beach, / Little Saigon, very much in that kind of the knife's edge between white culture and Vietnamese culture. And it involves, a family. It's called Half Sweet, and it involves a family during the last 2 weeks in hospice, or last maybe a week in hospice, as they sort of try to keep their dad alive, and are faced with all the same kind of mundane sort of machinations of the dying process. And so it just went through Gotham Week a couple weeks ago. We actually had like a virtual live reading of an excerpt earlier this week. I can share that with you guys. If anyone wants to keep tabs on that project, again, it's called Half Sweet. But in addition to that, I'm just taking some time off right now. I think I need to rejuvenate and recharge, and I would encourage anyone who has the opportunity to do so to stop hustling for a second and breathe.
Noted, Julian, for sure. Scott or Sean?
I have a memory I'd like to share of making my film. I had never experienced the type of humidity that there was when I went to Vietnam in September. Thinking about what it does to you, just like my clothes, it felt like I jumped in a pool with all my clothes on. It was just this feeling of this, the density of the air. And what I was struck by is like, I was wearing a shirt that it kind of became almost like this transparent film. And it was almost like an exposing experience of how all I had was just myself and my body and my senses to do what I was there to do and honor the time that was given to me. And I was, reflecting on what Julian said about how documentary is an endurance test. And they said how it demands a level of persistence. But I also think that documentary, in the way that my clothes became transparent, it allows you, it demands you to be open to your idea falling apart, or somebody saying, you have the wrong perspective on this, you need to reframe this, or maybe your perspective on the world has been shaped by something that's flawed. So I see my film, Ghost at Number 10, as me stumbling towards those revelations, and the film is kind of an artifact of my unlearning about the history of Vietnam. And the humidity I will always remember, kind of like nature, its way of saying, there's more, beneath the surface. So a memory to share. As for what I want to do next, I want to watch all of yours films. I can't wait to see them all. So thank you.
That humidity slaps you in the face, Sean. It's no joke. All right, Scott.
I guess an experience from the film is like working with the actress Julian. Thought it was really great working with her because she was just very collaborative, selfless, very generous and giving. Because like filmmaking is a collaborative medium, but there's just a lot of people involved, so it's really hard to find somebody to really have a history of like making so many film, but yet still very collaborative and still very open. And then also working with my visual effects supervisor, I learned a lot from him because he was like a 3-time Oscar-winning visual effect artist of supervisor, and he was very generous. So I think the experience was like when you work with really, really talented people, they're like the most selfless, generous, and giving, and like there's no ego whatsoever. So that was really great. And then I guess for the second question, I'm currently finishing up a feature script and hope to get that into production, and just continue to grow and learn to become a better writer and filmmaker. So that's it. And also I just want to say thank you to all the panelists, all the filmmakers, and I'm excited to watch your film this afternoon. So it's really good chatting with you. And also thanks Julie and Eric and Tony.
Thank you, Scott. All right. Well, that was our last question for our panelists. I just want to thank everyone who's watching for joining us today for our Saying Goodbye Sets conversation with our filmmakers. We hope you've been able to learn more about the films, stories behind the stories. A very special thank you to Scott Tran, Julian Doang, Sean David Christensen, and Nguyen Nguyen Lei for your time and willingness to let us into your thoughts, your insights, and your reflections. If you haven't seen their films, please check them out in the Saying Goodbye set. Also, Viet Film Fest is still showing in both the virtual space online, in addition to in-person screenings. So please visit vietfilmfest.com for full program details and to purchase your tickets. Thank you again to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists, and we hope you have a great day. Bye, everyone.